Zelensky's gambit, pulling NATO into direct war with Russia, will lead to World War III. The notion of Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky pulling NATO into a direct war with Russia is not just misguided, it is catastrophically dangerous. Such a course of action risks spiraling the world into a global conflict, one that would almost certainly end on Russia's terms. The stakes couldn't be higher, and the warning is clear: pursuing this path is a fast track to World War III. That's why I've conducted this analysis of what will happen if Zelensky's proposal is approved and implemented. The outcome would be disastrous for both Ukraine and the world. Zelensky's demands are, in my opinion, pure nonsense and will never be implemented. Russia will never accept Ukraine joining NATO, that simply isn't going to happen. The sooner Ukraine's leadership understands this, the better. The Ukrainian people can already see that Zelensky and his government have failed and must be replaced. I hope this happens through democratic means, but if not, Ukrainians must take decisive action to remove them from power, as their leadership has already run its course. NATO expansionism, the root of the conflict. It is critical to acknowledge that NATO's eastward expansion was one of the primary catalysts for the war in Ukraine. Russia has long viewed NATO's growth as a direct threat to its security, a sentiment Moscow has communicated repeatedly over the years. To address a conflict born out of NATO's expansion by escalating its involvement is not just counterproductive, it's incendiary. If NATO were to engage directly, it would confirm Russia's fears and narratives about Western aggression. This would embolden Moscow and provide it with the justification to escalate further, framing its actions as defensive in the face of an existential threat. A guaranteed path to escalation. Direct NATO involvement would undoubtedly escalate the conflict into a full-blown global war. Both NATO and Russia are nuclear-armed entities, and the likelihood of nuclear weapons being deployed in such a scenario is alarmingly high. This would bring humanity to the brink of destruction, as the principle of mutual assured destruction, MAD, hangs by a thread. Such an escalation would be catastrophic not only for Ukraine but for Europe and the entire world. It would signal the collapse of diplomatic mechanisms and global security frameworks, thrusting humanity into uncharted and dangerous territory. A losing battle for NATO. Some believe NATO's intervention would decisively turn the tide of the war in Ukraine's favor. However, this view underestimates Russia's military-industrial capacity, its deep reserves, and its willingness to endure hardships for what it considers a fight for survival. By contrast, NATO's unity is far from guaranteed. Several member states, including Hungary and Turkey, have expressed reservations about escalating tensions with Russia. Others, like Germany, face growing public opposition to prolonged military engagement in Ukraine. The cracks within NATO could widen under the strain of a direct conflict, undermining the alliance's ability to respond effectively. Russia's strategic advantage. A NATO-Russia war would likely end on Russia's terms. Moscow has demonstrated its ability to sustain a prolonged conflict despite severe sanctions and international condemnation. A direct confrontation with NATO would only bolster the Kremlin's narrative, galvanizing domestic support and positioning Russia as a defender against Western aggression. Furthermore, Russia's willingness to escalate, potentially to the nuclear level, would force NATO to confront an existential dilemma: either escalate in return or back down entirely. Either scenario leaves NATO weakened, while Russia remains defiant. Diplomatic isolation for Ukraine. If Zelensky's gamble fails, and it likely would, Ukraine could find itself diplomatically isolated. NATO's unwillingness to plunge into a global war for Ukraine is already evident in its cautious approach to military aid and its avoidance of direct confrontation. Should Zelensky persist in pushing NATO toward the brink, it risks alienating key allies and forcing them to reassess their commitments to Ukraine. A warning to the West. The trajectory Zelensky proposes is a reckless gamble with global consequences. NATO's direct involvement would be a fatal mistake, one that could destroy millions of lives and permanently alter the world order. The end result would not be Ukraine's liberation, but its obliteration, and it would mark a devastating victory for Russia on its terms. The international community must reject this perilous course and refocus on diplomacy. A peaceful resolution, however difficult to achieve, remains the only viable path forward. Continuing to fuel the conflict with escalations and provocations will only bring the world closer to the abyss. Thank you very much for listening. I hope you find the information and my perspective useful. Please subscribe and like my content, and if you feel inclined, you're always welcome to support me financially.